The wolf looked into his eyes and cried. Yes, cried, the way humans cry. Marcus Reed had hunted for 30 years, trapped for 20, and in all that time believed one unchanging truth. Predators took, they never gave. They survived on instinct alone, moving through forests like ghosts with no memory, no gratitude, no conscience. That belief kept him alive through blizzards, bear encounters, and nights when the wilderness tested every skill he possessed. Until the wolf arrived. It was the 14th of February when the storm came. Not the soft, romantic kind city people imagined, but the bone-crushing Arctic express that turned northern Manitoba into a white hell. Marcus had been tracking elk 3 days north of his usual territory when the sky turned iron grey and the wind began to scream. He knew the signs. 15 minutes to find shelter, or die trying. The abandoned lean-to appeared through the swirling white, like a gift from God. 3 walls of rotting timber and a partial roof that some forgotten trapper had built decades ago. Marcus kicked through the snowdrift blocking the entrance, dragged his pack inside, and sealed the gap with deadfall and his emergency tarp. His fingers were already numb. The temperature was dropping fast, 20 below, and falling. He built a fire in the stone ring some long-dead hunter had left behind. The flames caught reluctantly, hissing against the moisture in the wood. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing. Marcus pulled his sleeping bag tight around his shoulders and ate half a protein bar, rationing what little food remained. 3 days of hard tracking had depleted his supplies. The elk had vanished into the storm, and now he was trapped. That was when he heard it. A sound outside, not wind, something breathing. Marcus reached for his rifle slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. Through the gaps in the shelter wall he saw movement, a shadow darker than the storm, circling, waiting. Then it appeared in the entrance. The wolf was massive, easily 130 pounds, its fur matted with ice and blood. One eye blazed yellow in the firelight, the other was swollen shut. Its left hind leg dragged uselessly, the fur torn away to reveal raw flesh and the steel teeth of a trap still clamped around the bone. Marcus raised the rifle. His hands were steady. 30 years of hunting had taught him never to hesitate with a wounded predator. But the wolf did something impossible. It took one limping step forward and collapsed, not in attack position, not in a defensive crouch. It simply fell onto its side, exposing its throat and belly, the ultimate surrender. Its chest heaved with exhausted breaths. Blood pooled beneath its ruined leg. Marcus kept the rifle aimed at the creature's head. "Don't you move!" he whispered, though he knew it couldn't understand. The wolf's one good eye found his. There was no aggression there, no wild fury, just exhaustion and something else Marcus couldn't name. Something that looked almost like trust. His finger trembled on the trigger. One shot would end this. One shot was the merciful thing. The wolf was dying anyway. Infection, blood loss, starvation in the storm. Shooting it would be kindness, but he didn't shoot. Instead, Marcus heard himself say, "What the hell am I doing?" as he lowered the rifle and reached for his field medical kit. The wolf didn't move as Marcus approached, didn't flinch when he knelt beside it. Up close, he could see the extent of the damage. The trap had been on for days, maybe a week. The flesh was infected, swollen with poison. Without treatment, the animal had hours left at most. "This is insane," Marcus muttered, pulling out disinfectant and gauze. "You should be killing me right now." The wolf's eye tracked his movements, but its body remained still, surrendered. Marcus worked quickly. He pried the trap open with his multi-tool, his stomach turning at the grinding sound of metal against bone. The wolf whimpered once, a sound so human it made Marcus's hands shake, but didn't snap at him. He poured disinfectant over the wound, wrapped it in clean gauze, and gave the animal the only antibiotic injection he carried for emergencies. Then he pushed his last energy bar toward the wolf's muzzle. The creature sniffed it once and ate with desperate hunger. Marcus sat back against the wall, rifle across his lap, and stared at the wounded predator now lying 3 feet from him in the flickering firelight. The storm screamed outside, the fire crackled, and Marcus Reed, veteran hunter and trapper, realized he had just saved the life of something that could kill him in seconds. "If you eat me in my sleep," he said quietly, "I'm going to be really disappointed." The wolf closed its eye and slept. So did Marcus, though every instinct screamed that he was a fool. Marcus woke to silence. The storm had passed. Grey dawn light filtered through the gaps in the shelter walls. His fire had died to embers, and the wolf was gone. He sat up quickly, scanning the small space. The blood-stained snow where the animal had lain was the only proof it had been real. The tarp he'd used to seal the entrance hung loose, pushed aside from within. Marcus crawled to the opening and looked out. Fresh wolf tracks led away from the lean-to, heading north into the forest. The dragging mark of the injured leg was still visible, but less pronounced. The animal was moving under its own power. "Well," Marcus said to the empty woods, "you're welcome." He packed his gear mechanically, his mind still processing what he'd done. In 30 years he'd never treated a predator, never even considered it. You killed what threatened you, or you left it alone. Those were the rules. What he'd done last night broke every principle of wilderness survival. And yet, he stepped outside and breathed the sharp, clean air. The sky was pale blue now, cloudless. The storm had dumped 3 feet of fresh snow across everything. His body ached from cold and tension, but he was alive. The wolf was alive. That had to count for something. Marcus began the long trek back to his truck, 15 miles south. The snow was knee-deep in places, exhausting. By noon his legs burned with fatigue, his stomach cramped with hunger. He'd given his last food to the wolf. Stupid, sentimental, dangerous. He stopped to rest against a pine tree, breathing hard, when he heard movement in the brush. His hand went to his rifle. The wolf emerged from the tree line 30 yards away. Marcus's heart stopped. It was the same animal. He could see the fresh bandage on its leg, now stained dark, but still wrapped. The wolf limped forward 3 steps and stopped, its yellow eye fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "Go on," Marcus said quietly. "Get out of here. I patched you up. We're even." The wolf didn't move. Then it did something that made every hair on Marcus's neck stand up. It turned and walked parallel to his path, keeping 30 yards of distance between them, not approaching, not retreating, just following. Marcus started walking again. The wolf matched his pace, moving through the deep snow with surprising grace despite its injury. When Marcus stopped, the wolf stopped. When Marcus looked back, the wolf sat and waited. "What are you doing?" Marcus called out. No answer. Just that unblinking yellow eye watching him. By mid-afternoon, Marcus's situation had turned critical. The exertion through deep snow, combined with no food for 24 hours, had drained him completely. His vision blurred at the edges, his hands shook. He sat down heavily against a fallen log, trying to gather strength that wasn't there. The wolf sat 40 feet away, watching. Marcus closed his eyes. Maybe just a few minutes of rest, just a few minutes, and he could continue. His head dropped forward. When he opened his eyes again, the sun had shifted. He'd been out for at least an hour, and something lay in the snow 3 feet from where he sat, a snowshoe hare, freshly killed, still warm.
Marcus stared at it, his exhausted brain struggling to process what he was seeing. He looked up. The wolf sat in the same position, but closer now, 20 feet instead of 40. Blood stained its muzzle. "Did you—" Marcus's voice cracked. "Did you bring that for me?" The wolf's ear twitched. It made no move toward the hare. Marcus's scientific mind tried to rationalize it. Coincidence? The wolf had hunted for itself and dropped its kill, that was all. Animals didn't share food with humans. They didn't repay debts. That was Disney fantasy, not wilderness reality. But the wolf hadn't eaten the hare. It had placed it carefully, deliberately, within Marcus's reach, and then backed away. Marcus picked up the still warm animal with trembling hands. His survival instincts overrode his confusion. He field-dressed the hare quickly, built a small fire,
with shaking fingers, and cooked the meat in desperate silence. The protein hit his system like electricity. His vision cleared, his hands steadied. The entire time, the wolf watched him eat, never approaching, never leaving. When Marcus finished, he looked at the animal sitting in the snow. "Thank you," he said, and felt like a fool for saying it. The wolf stood, turned, and melted back into the forest. Marcus sat alone by his dying fire, staring at the rabbit bones in his hands, trying to convince himself he understood what had just happened. He couldn't. Marcus made it back to his truck by nightfall. His hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. The engine turned over with a roar that sounded obscene after days of wilderness silence. He sat there in the cab, heater blasting, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. Hollow eyes, 3 days of beard growth, the face of a man who'd seen something that didn't fit into any category he understood. The wolf hadn't followed him the last 5 miles. It had vanished back into the forest as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving only tracks in the snow and a story Marcus knew no one would believe. He told himself it was over. A strange encounter, an anomaly. Animals sometimes exhibited unusual behavior when injured or desperate. He'd read about dolphins pushing drowning swimmers to shore, about elephants protecting human children. Instinct could mimic intelligence, coincidence could look like intention. By the time he reached town, he'd almost convinced himself. Marcus stopped at the general store for supplies. Old Tom Ferguson was behind the counter, same as he'd been for 40 years. "Heard about that storm up north," Tom said, ringing up coffee and bread. "Glad you made it out." "It was close," Marcus admitted. "See anything interesting out there?" Marcus hesitated. The image of the wolf's yellow eye flashed through his mind, the hare placed carefully in the snow. "Nothing unusual," he said finally. Tom nodded and handed him his change. "Buddy of mine lost 2 traps last week. Says something big tore them right out of the ground. You see any wolves?" Marcus's hand froze halfway to his wallet. "What kind of traps?" "Leg-hold traps. Steel. Said whatever got caught pulled one clean off the chain before it got away." Tom shook his head. "Damn shame. Good traps aren't cheap." The steel teeth clamped around bone. The infection. The wolf had been caught in an illegal trap on someone else's line. "Your buddy shouldn't be using leg holds," Marcus said quietly. "They're banned in this territory." Tom shrugged. "You know how it is. Some folks still use the old ways." Marcus left without another word. That night, in his small cabin outside town, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the wolf surrendering on the shelter floor, saw it watching him eat the hare it had killed, saw it limping away into the forest with his bandage, still wrapped around its ruined leg. He got up at 2 in the morning and pulled out his wildlife behavior books. He'd collected them over decades: field guides, scientific studies, behavioral analyses. He read about wolfpack dynamics, about hunting strategies, about territorial marking and communication. Nowhere did he find anything about wolves bringing food to humans. Nowhere did he find mention of gratitude or reciprocity between species. The book spoke of instinct, survival drive, pack hierarchy. They spoke of intelligence, yes, problem-solving, complex social structures, even mourning behavior. But not this, never this. Marcus closed the last book and sat in the dark. Scientific literature didn't document everything, couldn't document everything. How many moments like his happened in wilderness areas where no human witnessed them? How many impossible behaviors occurred and died with the people who experienced them, dismissed as delusion or storytelling? He decided he was overthinking it. The wolf had been desperate, injured, seeking help from the only source available. It had dropped a kill near him by coincidence. These things happened. Strange, yes. Miraculous, no. Marcus went back to bed and forced himself to sleep. 3 days passed. He ran his trap lines, the legal ones, the humane ones that caught and released. He checked his hunting permits and prepared for the season. He fell back into routine, and with routine came the comfortable numbness of ordinary life. The wolf became a story he told himself on quiet evenings. An interesting anecdote, nothing more. He almost believed it. Then on the 4th morning, he walked outside to find something lying on his porch. A rabbit, freshly killed, placed carefully beside his door. And in the snow beyond his cabin, a single set of wolf tracks leading away into the forest. Tracks that showed a slight drag of the left hind leg. Marcus stood on his porch in the freezing dawn, staring at the gift, and felt the world tilt beneath his feet. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't instinct. This was something else entirely. And it wasn't over. The rabbit deliveries continued every 3 days like clockwork, always at dawn, always placed carefully on his porch, never torn or mangled, killed cleanly with a single bite to the neck. And always the tracks in the snow, 4 paws and that telltale drag of the injured hind leg. Marcus stopped trying to rationalize it after the 3rd rabbit. He started leaving the door open a crack at night, sitting in the dark with his coffee waiting. But the wolf never appeared while he watched. It came only when he slept, moving through the darkness like smoke, leaving its offering and vanishing before dawn broke. On the 10th day, Marcus found something different on his porch. Not a rabbit, a grouse. And beside it, a torn piece of his own gauze bandage, brown with dried blood. Marcus picked up the fabric with trembling hands. The wolf had removed the bandage. The wound must have healed enough that it no longer needed the wrapping. And the animal had brought it back to him, a message so clear it made his throat tighten. "I don't understand," he whispered to the empty morning. "What do you want from me?" That night, he didn't go inside. He sat on his porch in his heavy coat, rifle across his lap, and waited. The temperature dropped to 15 below. His breath came in white clouds. The forest around his cabin stood silent under a sky packed with stars. At 2 in the morning, the wolf appeared. It emerged from the tree line 50 yards away, moving slowly, cautiously. In the moonlight, Marcus could see it clearly. The grey and silver fur, the powerful shoulders, the yellow eyes that caught the light like lanterns. The left hind leg still showed a limp, but the animal moved with purpose and strength. The wolf stopped at the edge of his property and sat. Marcus didn't move, didn't speak. His heart hammered so hard he could hear it in his ears. They stared at each other across the snow, man and wolf, predator and predator, 2 creatures that should have been enemies, locked in a moment that defied everything Marcus thought he knew about the natural world. The wolf stood and took 3 steps closer, then 3 more. It moved with deliberate slowness, keeping its body low, non-threatening. 20 yards away now, close enough that Marcus could see the scar tissue on its healed leg. "Easy," Marcus breathed. The wolf stopped, its ears swiveled forward, listening. Then it did something that made Marcus's blood run cold. It picked up a stick in its jaws, a piece of deadfall branch lying in the snow, carried it forward 10 steps, and placed it carefully at the base of Marcus's porch stairs. Not dropped, placed, with the same deliberate care it had shown with every rabbit, every offering. Then the wolf backed away 3 steps and sat again, watching him. Marcus's scientific mind screamed that this was impossible. Wolves didn't use tools. They didn't make symbolic gestures. The recent documentation of tool use in wolves was preliminary at best, observed only once in controlled conditions. This was different. This was communication. "You're thanking me," Marcus said aloud, his voice cracking. "You're actually thanking me?" The wolf's tail moved once, a slight wag, there and gone. Marcus felt tears burn his eyes. 30 years in the wilderness, 30 years of tracking, hunting, studying animal behavior, and nothing had prepared him for this moment, for the weight of intelligence in those yellow eyes, for the deliberate, conscious gratitude of a wild creature that owed him nothing but chose to give him everything. "I don't—" Marcus's voice failed him. He tried again. "I don't know what to do with this." The wolf stood. It looked at him one more time, a gaze that seemed to pierce straight through him, and then turned and walked back into the forest. Not running, not slinking. Walking with dignity, with purpose, the way a person walks away after settling a debt. Marcus sat on his porch until sunrise, staring at the stick lying at the base of his stairs. A gift, a symbol, an impossible bridge between species that made mockery of every book he'd ever read, every certainty he'd ever held. When he finally went inside, he left the stick where it was. He knew the wolf would return, and God help him, he didn't know if he was ready for what that meant. Marcus began documenting everything. He set up his trail camera facing the porch, angled to capture the wolf's arrivals. He photographed each offering, 7 rabbits, 2 grouse, 1 squirrel, and logged the times, the placement patterns, the tracks. He measured the distance the wolf approached each night. He noted the healing progression of its leg. The data should have given him comfort, numbers, evidence, scientific observation, but the numbers only deepened the mystery. The wolf came every 72 hours, never varying by more than 3 hours. It always approached from the northwest. It always placed its offerings in the exact same spot on the porch. And it always waited until Marcus acknowledged the gift before leaving. On the 14th day, Marcus tried something that felt insane even as he did it. He left his own offering, a store-bought steak, raw and fresh, placed on a flat rock at the edge of his property. He retreated to his porch and waited. The wolf appeared at its usual time, 2 in the morning. It approached the property line, caught the scent of the meat, and froze. Its head swiveled toward Marcus sitting on the porch. Even from 50 yards away, Marcus could see the intelligence in that yellow gaze, calculating, assessing, understanding. The wolf approached the rock slowly, sniffed the steak once, twice. Then it picked up the meat gently in its jaws, carried it 10 feet away, and buried it in the snow with careful, deliberate movements. Not eating it, saving it. Then the wolf walked to the porch and placed its own kill, a fat rabbit, in the usual spot. Marcus's hands shook. "You won't take from me," he said quietly. "You'll only give." The wolf's ear twitched at his voice. It sat down, close enough now that Marcus could see the individual guard hairs in its coat, the white patch on its chest, the thin scar running along its muzzle from some old battle. "Why?" Marcus asked, knowing he'd get no answer. "Why do you keep coming back?" The wolf tilted its head, that achingly familiar gesture that dogs made when trying to understand human speech. The motion was so domestic, so recognizable, that it broke something inside Marcus's chest. Wolves were the ancestors of every dog that had ever loved a human, every loyal retriever, every devoted shepherd, every faithful mutt carried wolf DNA in its blood. Humans had spent 15,000 years breeding that wildness into companionship, that independence into devotion. But this wolf hadn't been bred, hadn't been trained, hadn't spent generations learning to trust humans. This wolf had made a choice. Marcus stood up slowly. The wolf's muscles tensed, but it didn't flee. He descended the porch stairs one at a time, moving with exaggerated care. 3 steps down. The wolf remained sitting. 4 steps. 5. Marcus reached the bottom and stopped 10 feet from the animal. Up close, the wolf was even more magnificent, easily 6 feet from nose to tail, 140 pounds of pure muscle and survival instinct. One swipe of those jaws could tear open his throat. One leap could knock him down. Every rule of wildlife safety screamed at him to back away. Instead, Marcus slowly knelt in the snow. The wolf watched him with those burning yellow eyes. Its breathing came in white clouds that drifted between them. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the wolf stood, closed the distance between them to 5 feet, and lowered its head. Not in submission, in acknowledgement, in respect. Marcus couldn't breathe, couldn't think. His vision blurred with tears that had nothing to do with the cold. He was kneeling in the snow before a wild predator that should have killed him or fled from him, and instead it was offering him something he had no words for. Recognition, partnership, trust so profound it shattered every barrier between wild and tame, between animal and human. "I see you," Marcus whispered. "God help me, I see you." The wolf held his gaze for 3 more heartbeats. Then it turned and walked away into the darkness, limping but strong, wounded but unbroken. Marcus knelt in the snow until dawn, crying like he hadn't cried since his father's funeral 20 years ago. Not from sadness, from awe, from the crushing weight of being seen, truly seen, by something wild and free that owed him nothing but chose to give him everything. The world had changed, or perhaps he had. He no longer knew the difference. Marcus stopped going into town. He stopped checking his trap lines. He stopped answering his phone when his brother called. His entire world narrowed to the wolf and the impossible relationship unfolding in his front yard every 3 days. He knew he was obsessed. He didn't care. On the 21st day, Marcus made a decision that would have gotten him labeled insane by every wildlife expert in the country. He decided to follow the wolf back into the forest. When the animal appeared at 2 in the morning, placed its offering, a ptarmigan this time, and turned to leave, Marcus stood up from the porch. "Wait," he called softly. The wolf stopped, looked back. Marcus descended the stairs and walked toward it, his heart hammering. The wolf watched him approach, but didn't retreat. When Marcus was 10 feet away, he stopped and gestured toward the forest. "Show me," he said. "Show me where you go." For a long moment, the wolf simply stared at him. Then it did something extraordinary. It turned, walked 20 paces toward the tree line, and stopped, looked back, waited. Marcus followed. The wolf led him into the forest at a measured pace, stopping every 100 yards to ensure Marcus kept up. The moon was bright enough to see by, and Marcus's eyes had long since adjusted to the darkness. They moved through the silent woods like ghosts, predator and human, walking side by side through territory that belonged to neither and both. After 30 minutes, the wolf stopped at the edge of a small clearing. It sat down and looked at Marcus expectantly. Marcus stepped forward, and his breath caught in his throat. In the center of the clearing lay the remains of a deer, a fresh kill, maybe 6 hours old. But that wasn't what made his heart stop. Around the deer carcass, 3 other wolves fed quietly. They looked up as Marcus approached, their eyes reflecting moonlight like coins. The injured wolf, his wolf, made a low sound in its throat, not a growl, something else. A vocalization Marcus had never heard before. The other wolves stopped eating. They watched Marcus with intense focus, but no aggression. One of them, a smaller female with dark fur, approached the injured wolf and touched noses with it, a greeting, a recognition. Marcus stood perfectly still, barely breathing. He was standing in the middle of a wolf pack's active kill site. This violated every principle of wildlife safety. He should be dead or running for his life. Instead, the wolves simply watched him, curious, wary, but not threatening. The injured wolf walked to the deer carcass, tore off a large piece of hindquarter meat, and carried it back to Marcus, placed it at his feet. Then it looked up at him with those yellow eyes, and Marcus understood. The wolf had brought him here deliberately, had introduced him to its pack, was sharing its kill, not out of desperation or coincidence, but out of choice, out of inclusion. "You're treating me like pack," Marcus whispered, his voice shaking. The dark female wolf tilted her head, studying him. The other 2, both males, one grey and one nearly black, remained by the kill but showed no signs of hostility. Their body language spoke of curiosity, not aggression. Marcus's knees went weak. He sat down hard in the snow, overwhelmed. Wolves had complex social hierarchies, sophisticated communication systems, deep emotional bonds within their packs. What he was witnessing wasn't instinct or conditioning. It was conscious social integration. The injured wolf had vouched for him somehow, had communicated his trustworthiness to its family, and they had accepted his presence in their most vulnerable moment, during a feed. This defied everything. Everything. "I don't deserve this," Marcus said, tears streaming down his face. "I've killed your kind. I've hunted you, trapped you. The injured wolf moved closer and did something that stopped Marcus's heart. It pressed its scarred muzzle against Marcus's shoulder. Just for a moment. A touch so gentle, so deliberate, it could only be called affection. Then it pulled back, looked at him one more time, and returned to its pack. Marcus sat in that clearing for an hour, watching the wolves eat and interact, watching them accept his presence as if he belonged there. As if the boundaries between species were illusions humans had created and animals had never believed in. When he finally walked back to his cabin alone, following his own tracks through the snow, Marcus Reed was no longer the man who had entered that forest. That man had believed in categories, in separation, in the fundamental difference between human and animal. That man was gone. The visits changed after that night. The wolf no longer came alone. Sometimes the dark female accompanied it. Sometimes one of the males. They would sit at the edge of Marcus's property in the pre-dawn darkness, watching his cabin with eyes that gleamed like stars. They never approached the porch, never left offerings, just watched. Marcus understood. They were testing him, assessing whether the trust their packmate had placed in him was justified.
On the 32nd day, the test became real. Marcus woke to the sound of distressed whining outside his cabin. Not the wolf's usual quiet arrival. This was urgent, panicked. He grabbed his rifle and flashlight and burst through the door. The injured wolf stood in his yard, agitated, pacing in tight circles. When it saw Marcus, it barked once, a sharp, commanding sound, and ran toward the forest. Stopped, looked back, barked again. "Something's wrong," Marcus said aloud. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his field medical kit, pulled on his heavy coat, and ran after the wolf into the darkness. The wolf led him deep into the forest, moving fast despite its healing leg. Marcus struggled to keep up, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly through the trees. His lungs burned, branches whipped his face, but the wolf never let him fall too far behind, always circling back, urging him forward with sharp vocalizations. After 20 minutes of hard running, they reached a rocky outcropping near a frozen stream. The dark female wolf lay at the base of the rocks, her hind leg bent at an unnatural angle. She whined softly when she saw them approach. The two male wolves stood guard nearby, their bodies tense with protective aggression. Marcus's medical training kicked in immediately. "Broken leg," he muttered, moving closer slowly. "Probably fell from the rocks." The male wolves growled low in their throats. Marcus froze. The injured wolf, his wolf, stepped between Marcus and the males. It made a series of low vocalizations, complex and modulated, speaking to them in a language Marcus couldn't understand, but could feel in his bones. The males' growls subsided. They stepped back, wary but no longer threatening. The injured wolf
Looked at Marcus and then at the dark female. The message was clear: help her. Marcus knelt beside the injured female, moving with exaggerated care. Up close he could see the compound fracture. The bone had pierced through the skin. Without treatment, infection would set in within days. She would die slowly and painfully. "This is bad," Marcus said quietly. "I can splint it, but she needs antibiotics. She needs rest. She needs—" The female wolf looked up at him with amber eyes full of pain and something else. The same trust he'd seen in the injured male's gaze weeks ago. The same impossible bridge between species. Marcus's hands shook as he opened his medical kit. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, I've got you." He worked quickly, cleaned the wound with disinfectant while the female whimpered but didn't snap at him. Set the bone as carefully as he could, feeling the male's eyes boring into his back the entire time. Splinted the leg with branches and medical tape. Gave her the antibiotic injection meant for his own emergencies. The entire time, the injured male wolf sat beside him, watching every movement. When Marcus finished and sat back, exhausted, the male touched his muzzle to Marcus's hand. The gesture broke something open inside Marcus's chest. This wasn't just trust anymore. This was partnership. They had come to him in crisis, had asked him for help, had placed the life of their packmate in his hands. "She needs to stay still for at least 2 weeks," Marcus said, looking at the injured male. "She can't run, can't hunt. She needs—" The wolf stood and walked to Marcus's side, pressed its shoulder against Marcus's leg, looked toward the cabin in the distance. Marcus understood immediately. "You want me to take her," he said, his voice cracking. "You want me to care for her." The wolf looked up at him with those burning yellow eyes, and Marcus saw it clearly. Not instinct, not conditioning, but conscious choice. Calculated trust, faith placed in a human by a wild creature that knew exactly what it was asking. "Jesus," Marcus breathed. All right. With the male's help, Marcus fashioned a travois from branches and his coat. Together, man and wolf working in silent coordination, they moved the injured female onto the makeshift stretcher. Marcus looked at the males standing guard. "She'll be safe with me," he promised. "I swear it." The wolves watched him drag their packmate away toward his cabin, and they didn't follow. They simply stood in the moonlight and trusted. The dark female wolf lived in Marcus's cabin for 16 days. He cleared out his back room, laid down blankets and straw, kept the wood stove burning constantly for warmth. He fed her raw meat twice daily, venison he bought from local hunters, chicken from the store. He changed her bandages every morning and evening, monitoring the wound for infection. He sat with her for hours, talking softly about nothing, and she listened with amber eyes. That never left his face. The other wolves came every night. They sat outside the cabin in a semicircle, the injured male, the two other males, and sometimes a fifth wolf Marcus hadn't seen before, an older female with a grizzled muzzle. They never approached the door, never made demands, just waited in the darkness, a silent vigil that continued from dusk until dawn. Marcus would open the door and call out updates. "She's eating well, the swelling's going down, she's going to make it." He felt insane talking to wild animals like they were family members waiting in a hospital lobby. But they listened, their ears swiveling toward his voice, and somehow it felt less insane than anything else that had happened. On the 16th night, the dark female stood up on her splinted leg for the first time. Marcus was cleaning her water bowl when he heard the scrape of claws on wood. He turned, and there she was, standing on all four legs, weight distributed carefully, testing the healed bone. Her amber eyes met his, and he saw it clearly. Determination, strength, the will to return to her pack. "Not yet," Marcus said softly. "Give it a few more days." She took one limping step toward the door, then another. Marcus understood. "You're done accepting help," he said, his throat tight. "You're ready to go home." He opened the back room door. The female limped through his cabin slowly, looking around with keen interest, taking in the furniture, the books, the rifle on the wall. She paused at the front door and looked back at Marcus. "I know," he said. "I know." He opened the front door. The four wolves waiting outside stood in unison. The injured male moved forward first, approaching the threshold with measured steps. When the dark female limped out onto the porch, he touched his muzzle to hers in a gesture so tender it made Marcus's vision blur. The other wolves crowded close, sniffing her, checking her wound, making low vocalizations that sounded like relief, like joy. The old female with the grizzled muzzle approached Marcus where he stood in the doorway. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes ancient and knowing, and then she did something extraordinary. She bowed her head, not in submission, in acknowledgement, in gratitude, so clear it needed no translation. Marcus's legs gave out. He sat down hard on his porch, tears streaming down his face, as 5 wolves stood in his yard and looked at him with something that could only be called respect. Love, even, the kind of bond that transcended species, that made mockery of every boundary humans had ever drawn between themselves and the wild world. "I don't—" Marcus's voice broke. "I don't know what to say." The injured male approached him slowly. It climbed the porch stairs, something it had never done before, and stood directly in front of Marcus. Close enough to touch. Close enough that Marcus could see the individual amber flecks in its yellow eyes, could smell the
wild musk of its fur, could feel the heat radiating from its body. The wolf held his gaze for 5 heartbeats. Then it leaned forward and pressed its forehead against Marcus's chest, right over his heart, and it stood there, breathing in rhythm with him, sharing warmth and space and something that had no name in any human language. Marcus wrapped his arms around the wolf's neck and sobbed. 30 years of hunting, 30 years of killing and trapping, and believing that animals were resources to be managed, problems to be solved, others to be feared or dominated. All of it crumbled under the weight of this impossible embrace. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the wolf's fur. "For every one of your kind I've hurt, for every trap I've set, for everything I didn't understand, I'm so sorry." The wolf pulled back slowly and looked at him with those yellow eyes that saw everything. It made a sound, not a growl, not a whine, but something else entirely. A vocalization that sounded almost like speech, like it was trying to tell him something in a language it didn't possess. Then the injured male descended the stairs and rejoined its pack. The 5 wolves stood together in the moonlight, and as one they tilted their heads back and howled. The sound shattered the night. 5 voices raised in harmony, a song older than human civilization, older than agriculture or cities or any of the constructs that separated people from the earth. It was triumph and gratitude and grief and joy all woven together in a symphony that made the stars themselves seem to pause and listen. Marcus howled with them. He threw back his head and released a sound from deep in his chest, clumsy and human and hopelessly inadequate, but honest. True. His voice joined theirs in the darkness, and for one perfect moment he wasn't a man standing apart from nature. He was part of the song, part of the pack, part of something vast and wild and impossibly beautiful. When the howling ended, the wolves turned as one and ran into the forest. The dark female moved slower, limping but strong, supported by her pack. The injured male looked back once from the tree line, its yellow eyes catching the porch light. Then they were gone. Marcus sat on his porch until sunrise, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the empty forest. His face was wet with tears, his chest ached with a fullness that felt like breaking and healing at the same time. He had saved a wolf, and the wolf had saved him right back. Marcus never saw the wolves again, not in the way he had before, not sitting in his yard at dawn, not leaving offerings on his porch, not leading him through midnight forests to share their kills. They returned to the wild, and the wild kept them, but he felt them. God, did he feel them. Every morning when he woke, he would find small signs. A tuft of grey fur caught on his fence post, tracks in the snow that circled his property but never approached. Once, a perfectly arranged pile of
feathers from a ptarmigan, not a kill, not an offering, just a message. We're here, we remember. Marcus stopped hunting entirely. He turned in his trapping permits, sold his rifles except for one he kept for emergencies. His brother called him crazy. Old Tom at the general store said he'd gone soft. The other hunters in town whispered that he'd lost his nerve after too many winters alone. Let them whisper. They hadn't knelt in the snow with a wild wolf's forehead pressed against their heart. They hadn't felt the weight of trust given freely by a creature that owed them nothing. They hadn't heard their own voice join a wolf-pack song under a midnight sky and felt, for one perfect moment, that they belonged. Marcus started volunteering with wildlife rehabilitation centers instead. He used his tracking skills to help biologists study migration patterns. He gave talks at schools about coexistence, about seeing animals not as resources or threats but as neighbors in a shared world. The children listened with wide eyes when he told them, carefully, always carefully, about the importance of respecting wild spaces. He never told them about the wolves. That story was too sacred, too impossible, too likely to be dismissed as fiction or delusion. 3 months after the dark female left his cabin, Marcus returned to the clearing where he'd first met the pack. He brought no camera, no recording equipment, no proof, just himself and a heart that still ached with wonder. The clearing was empty, the deer carcass long since consumed by scavengers and returned to the earth. Fresh snow had covered everything, erasing all evidence that anything extraordinary had ever happened there. Marcus stood in the center of the clearing and closed his eyes. "Thank you," he said to the silent forest, "for trusting me, for teaching me, for showing me that the world is bigger and stranger and more beautiful than I ever imagined." A sound made him open his eyes. At the tree line, barely visible in the shadows, stood a single wolf. The injured male. The one who had started everything by collapsing in a snowbound shelter and surrendering to the mercy of a human who had no reason to give it. Marcus's breath caught. The wolf's leg had healed completely. No limp, no drag, no sign of the terrible wound that had nearly killed it. It stood strong and whole, watching him with those yellow eyes that had haunted Marcus's dreams for months. They stared at each other across the clearing. No movement, no sound, just recognition, just two beings who had saved each other's lives and in doing so had shattered every certainty about what was possible between wild and human. The wolf dipped its head once, a nod, an acknowledgement, a goodbye. Then it turned and vanished into the forest like smoke, like a dream, like something Marcus might have imagined except for the single set of tracks it left behind in the snow. Tracks that showed 4 perfect paws with no drag, no injury, no sign of anything but strength and survival, and the kind of grace that only wild things possess. Marcus stood in the clearing and cried, not from sadness, from awe, from the crushing, overwhelming, impossibly beautiful weight of having witnessed something that shouldn't exist, but does, something that science can't fully explain and language can't adequately describe, something that happens in the thin places where wild meets human and both are forever changed. I'm recording this story now 5 years later because Marcus told it to me last winter. We were sitting in his cabin drinking coffee and I asked him why he'd given up hunting, why a man who'd spent 3 decades in the wilderness had suddenly walked away from everything he knew. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because a wolf taught me that gratitude isn't human. It's universal. And once you've been seen, truly seen by something wild, you can't go back to believing you're separate from it." His hands shook when he said it. His eyes were wet. And I knew, watching him, that whatever had happened in those woods had marked him as permanently as any scar. Some people will say this story is impossible, that I've embellished it, that Marcus imagined it, that wolves don't think or feel or choose the way humans do. Those people have never stood in a midnight forest and felt the boundaries between species dissolve, have never been trusted by something that had every reason to fear them, have never howled with wolves under winter stars and understood, finally, that we're all just animals trying to survive in a world that's more connected than we dare to admit. Marcus still lives in that cabin. The wolves still leave signs, and sometimes, on clear winter nights, he stands on his porch and howls into the darkness. The forest always howls back. If you've ever felt that connection, if you've ever been changed by an animal's wisdom, write in the comments. They remember kindness. Share your own story of when the impossible became real. Because these moments happen more often than we admit. We just need to be brave enough to believe them.